Nocturne, to the Devil Born. Peter H. Gilmore was born in Paterson, New Jersey, America's first planned industrial city. He shares his birthplace with Colt firearms and the first practical submarine, the Fenian Ram, built by inventor and Paterson schoolteacher John Holland in 1879. Peter's family background, however, is not industrial, but artistic. His grandfather David trod the boards as a vaudevillian with his own traveling minstrel show. He played different ethnic characters and made a few recordings. Peter's maternal grandfather, William, was a pastry chef, much in demand at the resorts along the Atlantic seaboard. He created large architectural representations in pastry and ice sculptures that dominated the buffet tables at the fanciest parties and banquets. Donald, Peter's father, was a dog groomer and handler, as well as a small businessman and entrepreneur. He established several shops, kennels, and facilities around the tri-state area, and handled champions at Westminster, as well as other major competitions. Peter's mom, Frances, painted and decorated. She exercised her artistic abilities in her home by creating things to make it beautiful, and encouraged her children to do the same. She is also a self-taught organist and enjoys playing the old standards for her own pleasure and that of her friends and family. This early exposure to the business of dog breeding and champion bloodlines quickly gave Peter an adult's perspective on the biological sciences in general. Puppies came from breeding dogs before they got to those newspaper-strewn bins at the pet shop, and Peter concluded that babies had a similar source. He confirmed this by checking out a few biology books at the library. His parents allowed Peter to explore his early interest in animals and nature in general. His bedroom gurgled with several aquariums, tanks, and terrariums, and he took over the backyard with a wading pool for captured turtles, frogs, snakes, and other squishy things he found in the woods. Peter was independent, inquisitive, and fearless of the non-human inhabitants of the forests of the lower Hudson Valley, where he grew up. He'd wander on his own for hours and knew the location of hidden lakes, caves, and waterfalls. He was a smart kid, learned to read quite early, and began exploring books. Books fed his imagination, and his imagination pushed him to create the things with his hands that did not exist for purchase. He made forts, models, and miniature cities, as well as creating and recording the histories, political systems, and urban planning that went along with them, and he read as much as he could of the myths and pantheons of the Roman, Greek, and Hindu gods, being fascinated by the ruins of lost civilizations, as well as looking into the strange beliefs of present-day religions. Peter quickly concluded that all these myth systems were on the same footing. Interesting stories made up to help people feel more important in the vast scheme of things, when in fact they were no higher or lower than the bears he observed in the woods, or the hawks that soared overhead. The animals he admired didn't need gods, and neither did he. By rote and custom, however, Peter's parents required him to learn their loose Roman Catholicism, and he participated in this religious instruction for as long as necessary, acting as an anthropologist studying an odd, primitive culture. He has a clear memory of officially declaring his atheism on the day of his first communion at age 8. After weeks of studying to receive the sacrament, the purported transubstantiation of bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ, Peter insisted it was just another myth, and not as interesting as the Greek ones filled with heroes and monsters. Over 20 years later, I was sorting through a shelf of his books from childhood and found his communion missal. He had inscribed his name and the date of that milestone, May 1st, 1966, the day after the founding of the Church of Satan. Science, art, books, movies, and the wonderful toys that went with them were his burning interests as he grew up. Like many boys in the 60s, Peter was fascinated by space exploration, robots, and all the futuristic developments these things promised. He never missed Star Trek or a NASA launch on television. He carefully combed the TV guide for late-night broadcasts of horror movies, especially those involving vampires or giant Japanese monsters. Without the convenience of videotapes and DVRs, Peter relied on his own imagination and drew pictures of scenes from his favorite movies and shows from memory so he could enjoy these magical images over and over again. He also illustrated favorite myths and events from the histories he'd invented from his sci-fi civilizations. Peter never developed a taste for popular music. As he entered high school and concentrated more on painting and developing along with his academic studies, he didn't adopt rock music as a mode of rebellion, unlike many other boys his age. Instead, his interest was sparked by the music of Beethoven. It was strong, bombastic, and complex, engaging both his emotions and his intellect. And it was much more like the film music he'd also grown to love. Peter began haunting the Newburgh Library, housed in a Victorian building with its collection of LPs, and eventually discovered another favorite composer, Gustav Mahler. He would blast the music of Mahler and Beethoven for hours while he worked on his surrealistic paintings inspired by Bosch, Dali, and Ernst. Sometimes he'd miss school for days, staying awake around the clock while he worked on something that was absorbing him. Despite these absences, Peter was the valedictorian for our graduating class and at the top of our school's National Honor Society. One of his innovations while participating in the NHS was to make the induction ceremony more gothic and atmospheric, with darkness and candles and a very secular individualist oath. He did an Easter presentation in a social studies class in opposition to some born-agains, reading from Christian scriptures. He chose texts from the Satanic Bible and read them dramatically over recordings of Mussorgsky's Night on Bald Mountain and Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. Parents who heard from their kids about this complained to the Board of Education, but when the principal confronted him, Peter stood his ground, explaining that there should be pluralism of viewpoints, and the man agreed. The 70s were far more liberal times than now. Peter also worked as the editor-in-chief of our yearbook and created the painting that wraps around the cover. The twisted bodies and bizarre landscape were a bit of a surprise to many of our uptight classmates who made a point of encasing the book in brown paper as a method of protest. Even then, Peter was making waves and challenging the status quo. Peter's painting is what brought us together. When we were both in our junior year, the school's art department had a festival highlighting the work of the student body's most prominent young artists, and I came across Peter's self-portrait in one of the display cases. "Wow, this is weird," I commented to Laurie, who was with me at the moment as she usually was, being my best friend and co-conspirator. "I know that guy. That's Peter Gilmore. He's in my social studies class. I think he's a Satanist or something." It's a pretty good self-portrait because it looks just like him. "I have to meet him," I replied. I did meet him. We were married in 1981. Laurie was my honor attendant, and now that self-portrait hangs in our living room. As the end of high school approached, painting had already become too static an art form for Peter. His interest in music, foreign films, and the works of Ayn Rand had coalesced into a desire to tell stories on a larger scale, and so upon graduation he enrolled in the film program at the School of Visual Arts. The collectivist political attitudes and agendas of his professors quickly became apparent, and this, along with the necessity of committee efforts in the making of films, quickly convinced Peter to transfer out. Despite his lack of early training, he decided to pursue what had become his great passion: music. He began studying music from the ground up, and in a few short years had received both bachelor's and master's degrees in musical composition from New York University, and began writing music. Peter contributed musical introductions for albums by black metal band Acheron, and he has created electronic music scores for some independent film productions. Several of these latter pieces, along with other original compositions, are collected on the album Threnody for Humanity. Peter is in the process of rebuilding his music studio with modern computer technology in anticipation of releasing his Symphony No. 1, Ragnarok. So you may well ask, if Peter was first an artist and a filmmaker and ultimately a composer, why is it a book of essays that you're holding right now? Because Peter H. Gilmore is also a writer. One of Peter's favorite activities when he was growing up was taking the commuter bus with a friend down to New York City and then riding the subway up to the American Museum of Natural History to look at the dinosaur bones and other displays in this vast and dusty old mother lode of biological artifacts. On one occasion, when Peter was 13, the boys returned to the Port Authority bus terminal a little too early and decided to kill some time browsing the many shops along the main floor. One of these was the Book Bar, a tiny bookstore sandwiched in near Teepee Town, and the coffee shop, and this was where Peter first picked up the Satanic Bible by Anton Szandor LaVey. At first, Peter wanted to reject the paperback with its dark, forbidding cover and Ming-esque author photo on the back, thinking that it was probably just a lot of silly, spooky language directing the reader towards some mythical entity who promised to answer your prayers or spells or whatnot. But the black-bound tome kept pulling him back. The very simplicity of its title, that left no room for misinterpretation of the author's point of view was strangely compelling. The book went home with him, and the rest is history. Like so many other Satanists before and after him, Peter read through the Satanic Bible in a single sitting and knew that he was a Satanist. He read each subsequent book by Dr. LaVey as soon as it hit the stands. Historically, he was living right in the middle of the Church of Satan's early phases and began seeing news reports and print media articles about LaVey and his disciples. When The Devil's Avenger appeared on the paperback racks, Peter bought a copy and was enthralled to learn that the man who had changed history with his little black book was just as interesting and colorful as Peter hoped he'd be. At 15, Peter wrote to the Church of Satan, and his letter was referred to a local grotto. He was politely turned away because of his age, but was provided with some written materials and encouraged to continue his studies and come back when he was old enough. He did. In fact, we did it together in 1982 while we were both in college. Our active applications were submitted and accepted in 1984, when we both felt that we might have some time to contribute to the church itself. Peter was asked to serve as a local contact for other members because of his thorough grasp of the church and its philosophy. Then, in 1986, we were ready to accept an earlier invitation to the Black House on California Street to meet the great man. Anton LaVey was everything we'd hoped he'd be, and more. We were treated to hours of conversation in the infamous Purple Parlor, a midnight tour of San Francisco from the back seat of the Black Jaguar, and an intimate concert by the Inferno keyboard wizard in the chilly kitchen of the old Victorian house on the way to the sea. And it turned out that Anton LaVey was suitably impressed with us too. When a media opportunity presented itself soon after our first visit to San Francisco, Peter was asked by Dr. LaVey to represent his ideas and his church on national television. Thus began a career with the Church of Satan that included media representations on national, international, and local television, radio, newspapers, and magazines. This was during the turbulent heyday of the Satanic Panic, when TV show hosts like Geraldo were exploiting the public's misconceptions about Satanism, and Christian cops were making big bucks educating other law enforcement agencies with misinformation and outright fantasies. Peter made his media chops fielding questions, accusations, hostile hosts, and crazy religious basket case panelists in the furor of this media frenzy. His pleasant voice, ever-present humor, and complete confidence in his knowledge of satanic philosophy and the ways Satanists apply it to their lives has made Peter the consummate satanic representative for almost 20 years. In this day of podcasts and internet radio, it shows no signs of slowing down. Peter also assisted with the administration and management of our growing organization and sent out a clarion call in 1988 when he founded the Black Flame, the first newsstand magazine for and by Satanists. His interest in exploring the implications of our philosophy, as well as presenting the ideas of other intelligent Satanists doing the same, sparked the need for this journal, which began to draw a circle of those who would become our friends and co-conspirators for years to come. In the same manner that a tidal wave follows a drawing down and receding of the waters, a renewed cross-fertilization of ideas and projects among Satanists followed the Satanic Panic, much of it in response to the Black Flame and Blanche Barton's books, The Secret Life of a Satanist, a new biography of LaVey, and The Church of Satan, a history of the world's most notorious religion. Peter began writing essays to clarify and clear up misconceptions, to quash rumors and myths about our organization and its founder, and to explore areas of modern culture where our ideas were creating change and the evolution that LaVey had predicted. Many of those essays have been collected here. In addition to expanding on Satanic philosophy and explaining the attitudes and actions of Satanists, Peter has also explored the use of greater magic over the years, creating new rituals and invocations. Together with our friends, we've attempted ceremonies in different settings and spaces. We've collaborated on carefully rehearsed and scheduled workings, such as thunderous versions of Die Elektrischen Vorspiel, as well as breaking into spontaneous rituals as the mood arose. One held in the total darkness deep in a lava tube beneath Mount St. Helens. On the first anniversary of the passing of Anton LaVey, Peter and I organized and hosted a memorial piano concert in LaVey's memory, with the idea that our founder was first and foremost a musician, and this was the best way to remember him in a group setting. Years later, on June 6, 2006, in recognition of the public's misconceptions about the numerical significance of this date, Peter presided over the largest group ritual ever celebrated by members of the Church of Satan at the Steve Allen Theater in Los Angeles. By exploiting popular culture's prejudices and fears about the dreaded 666, our present High Priest has continued the Church of Satan's long history as the profane world's cosmic joy buzzer. And so by reason of all of the above, this volume contains rituals by Peter H. Gilmore as well as his essays. What else can I tell you about the man who succeeded Anton LaVey as High Priest of the Church of Satan, appointed to that position in 2001 by High Priestess Blanche Barton? He enjoys fine wine, as well as good music. He's lived the majority of his adult life here in New York City, taking full advantage of our proximity to the greatest concert halls and classical music venues in the world. Our living spaces are clogged with the evidence of a lifetime of voracious reading and book and film collecting, along with models, toys, paintings, and figurines of the monsters who occupy his imagination. He wears mostly black and likes red meat. He takes wonderful care of our chow dog, Contessa Bella Lugosi, and her coat gleams as a result. He is a great husband, or I wouldn't be around to celebrate 25 years of marriage with him, and we are definitely celebrating. But the most important thing I have to tell you about Peter H. Gilmore is that he is just like any other Satanist in one very significant way. You found Satanism on the shelf of a bookstore. The words in the Satanic Bible spoke to the very center of Peter's dark satanic soul. He wasn't born into a traditional satanic family. He wasn't initiated by his granny during the dark of the moon. Peter H. Gilmore is a Satanist, born because of who he is and what he does. He shaped his life and destiny by his own wits, will, and desires. And according to the Satanic Bible, We all possess the power to do that. Maga Peggy Nadramia, High Priestess, October 31, 41, Anno Satanas, Hell's Kitchen, New York City.